Thanks so much, Alyssa. Okay, so thank you very much to everyone for participating in the last 2 days. I don't know about you, but my brain is exploding. And we've learned some of the tools of changing behavior in terms of how do we affect learning, how do we use learning principles, how do we use reinforcement learning. And one of the most important tools is repetition and consolidation. So my job in the next 5 to 8 minutes is help us consolidate everything we heard over the last 2 days. Before I forget though, you will also, IPSIT will make some final announcements, but you'll be, most importantly, be receiving from TIPS a survey, probably while I'm speaking or very shortly after this evening. Please fill it out while all this is fresh on your mind, because we'll very much use your data to help us design next year. Okay, so again, thank you for being here as part of our focus on digital mental health and technology and psychiatry, particularly across the lifespan. We started on Monday morning with Gary Gottlieb of Harvard Medical School and former chair of partners, talking about the fact that 30% of our there's a 30% increasing in our disorders of aging by 2030, with over 100 million affected by aging and chronic illness, and how using telemedicine technologies and translating science is really critical. It's both an amazing opportunity but an absolute requirement in a sense for our field. Keith Fargo, the Director of Scientific Programs for Alzheimer's Association, pointed out that over 1 in 10 of those who are over 65 have Alzheimer's or dementia, and 1/3 of those greater than 85. And $290 billion are spent caring for those with dementias, and 2/3 of Medicare and Medicaid costs are going in that way. And by 2050, over $1 trillion. This is an epidemic that has to be solved, and technology may be one of the most important areas. We can now have the hope of identifying preclinical Alzheimer's disorders with disease-modifying therapies. And again, just last week, the exciting news that perhaps the Biogen aducanumab is going to be submitted for FDA approval. But despite even new biologics, we've got to have technology both for identifying, stratifying, and improving our approaches. And in fact, mild behavior impairment, parallel to MCI, may be more sensitive precursors. And one of the example technologies that he shows was Map Habit, visualizing your day, and that was one of the winners of the Eureka Challenge. And when I talk a little bit later about Bettina's work from Bergen, that's also a great example that we heard of using technologies for resilience building and basically keeping people young, which we know can have a large effect. Antonia Holloway from Digital Cognition Technologies talked about the DCT clock, and we heard a couple different components around neuropsychology and the importance of early detection for dementia and mild cognitive impairment with long-term care. But our traditional methods are obviously burdensome, paper and pen, et cetera. And using AI clock to draw analyses is really their approach. And with DCT clock developed and validated across over 1,400 people with strong validity, and also showing that it's not that it can predict across disease stages with robust face validity. Bettina Husebo of Bergen focused on pain and advanced care planning and using technology in the elderly population in Scandinavia, and focusing on what is pain, grief, depression, apathy, agitation, and apathy, and how important emotional memories and approaches to these are. Pointing out some of the data that although you may have pain in this population at a high rate, they don't tolerate morphine well, nor antidepressants, which increase agitation and confusion, and the opportunities for technology to improve these approaches. The WHO study showed risk reduction in dementia can be significantly decreased, with the Lancet study showing 35% decrease with social activity and increasing quality of life interventions, and how much technology can be used to do this, with one of their applications being better age to predict, prevent, and support. And across both Bergen and across Norway, how they can use these tools to detect dementia in nursing homes and assisted living to really enhance resilience. Some of the memorable videos we saw was the 95-year-old man sawing wood. I asked Bettina if that was the safest way that we could do this, but apparently they stand by it, as well as the great-grandmother in bed with her iPad talking to her grandchildren, and really the importance of using real-life settings for sustainability and data collection for building resilience and protecting against mild cognitive impairment. Stephen Bartels of the Mongan Institute and MGH talked about telemental health and aging, and pointed out the alarming statistic that the median age of death for people with severe mental illness is 52 years old, with 25 to 30 years of potential life lost. And in fact, our common disorders of cardiovascular disease and cancer are the major causes of death. And they have been working on this in various ways for almost 20 years with some of the first generation remote telemedicine devices, the Health Buddy for automated self-monitoring, health data entry, self-management, remote nurse monitoring, and some of the early findings substantiated found a lot of undiagnosed hypertension and poorly controlled diabetes. And the third generation now is really integrating illness with self-management, and their chronic disease self-management program is a peer-led chronic disease self-management program that's currently being tested in 600 people with severe mental illness and chronic health conditions. The panel discussion talked about a variety of themes, one of which how Scandinavia seems the perfect place with where if they can develop the right tools, you could really, with their universal health care, deliver them and really try out some of the things we talk about but have so much complexities in the States. The importance of collaboration with industry. None of this can be done by academia or industry alone. Best practices, the device that is linked to the human is critical, and that's of course a theme we heard throughout. We can't get rid of the human. In fact, in mental health, it's how do we use technology to support the human, support and make more efficient the processes that we have. Over and over again, we don't give older adults enough credit, and then if we give them tools that bring them things they want, like pictures of their grandchildren, et cetera, people will absolutely use it and will pick it up, and that should not be an impediment to us. And Bettina reminded us that over 10 million with dementia in Japan and 15 million in Europe, and some of the data that loneliness may be one of the earliest risks in those at-risk communities. And so technology tools that can reduce loneliness can be critical in so many different ways in addition to quality of life. The importance of registries, how to best integrate technologies, and how to use risk stratification, with Stephen saying the great hope is that population-based precision medicine with digital phenotyping and genetics will allow targeted subgroups that can really allow us to do much better than currently. Wendy Nilsson of the NSF talked, and Department of Computer and Information Scientists talked to us about how to work across fields, pointed out that there are more phones in the world than toilets and toothbrushes at this point. So some of our statistics were quite bothersome, I think, but the importance of robots that interact well with humans, user-centered interaction designs, and that they're really engineering and whole rules. There's whole communities that focus on some of these approaches that often those of us in mental health and are excited about technology and mental health are not as aware of, and that we have to combine with and work together with. And the importance of personalized, context-aware computing. Important reminder that less than 1% of patients end up at academic centers, and that you can't collaborate on your own, and made the funny comment about gold standard in money and ground truth in mission. From NSF, we reminded that there are grants for collaborations across healthcare and computer science and engineering departments, and we should be using those. The ideas of prescription apps and some of the approaches there, and that we must take risks to be open to new experiences and don't be afraid. Our first panel was longitudinal assessment of health and behavior with Dana Wolf from NIH, talking about the K Award, the K18M Health Awards, as well as the U grants for longitudinal behavioral health. Billy Nahumshani and Donna Sprutz-Metz, forgive me everybody for screwing these names up, talked about intensive engagement and the critical importance of engagement, that from treatment refractory to interventions changing behavior, if we can't engage, nothing else matters. Some of the definitions of engagement, they talked about their approaches with the SARA project, Substance Abuse Research Assistance, thinking about how much engagement is needed across all levels of affective and cognitive, with one of the important components of don't throw out your data on study contacts, that may be one of your most important trip points about when people are having changes in engagement, and the importance of smart adaptive trials for frequent randomization to identify what works with whom over time. Stephen Until from Northeastern, changing behavior with EMA approaches. He's worked in apps related to stress, activity, dieting, sleeping, mother-infant dyads, the importance of context sensitivity of the sampling, for example, having an inhaler in asthma, when you press the inhaler button, that is a trigger device or sleep disturbance, the importance of event-based sampling. And engagement, that paying for compliance is one way, and it can be relatively low amounts as well as other kinds of rewards, real-time monitoring approaches, and one of the more exciting components he talked about was the 2-second micro-interactions, and their data was that micro-interactions with single questions, they could have 8 times more interruptions in the day, but that actually had higher response rates and study compliance than a single EMA interaction that had 8 questions, and the importance of incorporating fun and less predictability and reducing question frequency, though the issues of micro-AMA. Matt Nock, really one of the world leaders in understanding suicidality, how to use intensive longitudinal monitoring to understand, predict, and prevent suicidal behavior, that the same predictors with the same methods will lead to the same results, and if we're not observing what's most important, we're not going to be able to predict the future. Talking about the history of electronic data from the Palm Pilot to the Life Shirts, and now with the CocoBot, automated suicidality resources, combining that with some of the suicide hotline work. All right, I'm running low on time, so I'm going to move faster here. We had our keynote address from Dr. Molly Coyle, Executive in Residence of AVI, previously Chief Innovation Officer at UCA Health, gave us a lot of important components, important at the level of delivery systems and health systems, the importance of key performance indicators, digital precision population medicine with the 80-20 rule, triaging with probabilistic listing of diagnosis is probably where we're going to be landing and not diagnostics per se. The example of Buoy Health that grew to 3 million visits per month in 15 months due to its tools and integration and engagement that collates healthcare apps and options. There's other examples with Ginger, with Consejo Sano for culturally linguistically appropriate versions, and Zinx from Microsoft, the tool to integrate apps and a curated list of apps in HRs so that physicians and providers can provide apps to their patients. In the afternoon panel, we talked about, had the very entertaining digital child and adolescent psychiatry. Reminder that suicide is the second leading cause of death in adolescents. Anne Marie Albano talked about virtual reality and treatment of anxiety disorders. Some of the memorable components of there is her real-life snakes in the lab and the possible problems of role-playing with a middle-aged therapist being asked out on a date. And really the power of virtual reality environments for social anxiety and using digital tools to extend therapy work. Melissa Brotman, working with Ellen Liebenluft and others studying irritability in youth with their comets to inhibit motor responses in kids and how powerful that could be for both data collection and intervention. And Tony Sosong about telepsychiatry, the importance of remote, real-time, synchronous approaches, and that there are really no absolute contraindications to telepsychiatry. Helen Ager shared the story of the preschool soccer kids in which, with the boy who everybody thinks is a bad boy, but he's really a sad boy, that elicited many awes from the audience. But the importance of using technology to really to capture data on our kids and to really help them with the 2 examples of autism and the developmentally sensitive algorithms, picking up the social referencing data, and the When to Wonder Picky Eating scalable digital platform. Today we started with a terrific discussion on ethics led by Benji Silverman with Larger Mind, Roscoe Brady, Jim Wilkins, and Rob Schleitman. Some of the main take-home points were real-time data collection, and transparency was the most common word we used. We talked about several cases, sharing data, and the issues where there was really very little pushback in the idea of when we have things what we know what to do with, for example, a specific finding on an MRI, but when we don't know what to do with it, be it magnetic resonance spectroscopy or maybe a clinical questionnaire that is not really clinically validated, what do you do with that? And there were a range of opinions for which I think the answer is not a hard answer yet, except transparency was clearly one of the main themes. The importance of how do we think about suicidality, what is the application to research with research monitoring for suicidality, was really arranged that some felt we were clinically obliged in real time to respond, and others that if it's really down to how do we best communicate at the level of consent what we will or will not do, and making sure that's clear from the beginning. With one example being, what if we inform consent, if we informed them that we would collect data just like Google Maps does or just like Facebook does for normalizing the process, and while we might not feel that was ethical, it might be accurate. Saul Levine from the APA talked about digital practice in psychiatry, covered the utility of telepsychiatry, health apps, data risks, and opportunities in technology. Talked about the examples of the liver has fewer cell types than 10, but the brain has thousands, and obviously this is a lifetime, many lifetimes of work with the complexity of brain and behavior. The most fun memory of him, both the discussion of Neuralink, the potential risks and benefits, and how we must be open to future, but we have to be aware of risk and benefits. And teleporter was his favorite technology he would like to see. The breakout panels, we talked to, I'll stop at this point, but we talked about the graphic representation of mental health with Sahib Khalsa, systematized method for neuropsych assessment with Shifal Singh, analyzing effect of psychoactive drugs with automated free speech, both semantic and acoustic measures. Gil Noem on the Pear Institute approaches to big data in school-based approaches and how we can really build resilience at school-based approaches, driving data-driven ways for socioeconomic, socio-emotional development. How can the digital footprint impact research and care by John Torres, covering a range of issues around deep learning models by Dave Benremo, Rachel Ostrand on linguistic features, and Shirley Wang with dynamic modelings of ecological momentary assessment, and really the discussion of how to improve these approaches. And finally, can digital approaches reduce negative clinical outcomes? And sorry for those at the end, we got to finish. And then Shelley Greenfield led towards better health and better access to care with some great examples of Jerry MedRisk, which is really approaching providing geriatric consultation across all of Ontario, and notably the Northeast province, for those who didn't know of Ontario, is bigger than France. Caroline Figuero, adaptive learning algorithms to increase physical activity in low ethnic minority populations, and Karen Fortuna and Robert Walker in peer-led support groups, and Noah Robinson on virtual reality. In my final comments, this is a real-time Wordle of all the words from 20 pages of notes. The future of technology in psychiatry is vast, it's amazing, it's overwhelming, but it's also our obligation. And thank you all for being part of this experience, and I just think it's been such a pleasure to be here. So we'll start with thanking Ipsit Vahia for putting this on.